Good afternoon, everybody. It's a bit like walking into the Dragon's Den. Hopefully it's not. Hopefully we've got something that we can share with you that's useful and will support sort of sustainable sort of farming sort of going forward. So we're going to talk to you about risk assessment tool called the Alert tool, and that's the agricultural land environment risk and there's an opportunity in there, opportunity tool. So I've said that once, I won't say that again, Ben. So this is really, I say, it's an opportunity to talk about the tool, and then Ben is going to come up and talk about the work that the approach of the sharing the Alert tool and tools that Wye Usk Foundation are developing at the moment, going forward, and then working with supply chains to really take this and sort of put it into practice and test this approach really. So first up, just a quick perspective around some of this. Could have borrowed your slide, Phil, from me. But we realise that in the picture there we see with runoff and erosion, it is very much an issue in the catchment. And it's been happening for a long time, and it will continue to happen for a long time. We can't stop this as a catchment, but what we can do is obviously use approaches and tools to help reduce the risk of this happening, because it's very key. It's key to a whole issue around obviously water quality, nutrients and phosphates, etc. So first and foremost, let's see what we can do to actually reduce this and make it better and improve it. And this is particularly relevant with, we mentioned climate change, these extreme events, the rainfall that we're getting, and also changes in land use as well. We've got a lot of arable farming in the catchment, quite a lot of high risk farming in the catchment, and it all comes together potentially to make a perfect storm. So we need all the tools really to help us with this. And then clearly recognising this risk and planning accordingly is key. And there's a lot of factors that affect the risk. It's about the landscape, it's about the soil. We talked to you about the importance of improving soil, improving organic matter, improving its structure. There's a lot of variables there with risk assessment. We've got the whole landscape, we've got the receptors, how close we are to water courses, issues with contamination, pollution to groundwaters, lots and lots of variables that we've got to consider together collectively in order to tackle the risk. Look, sector engagement is really important. We can't do this without everybody. It's everybody's responsibility, and working with the supply chains and with the growers, farmers, landowners. It's about everybody sort of taking ownership of the issues and doing their bit. And we can't do this without everybody's support. And it's vitally important that we share all the knowledge, all the experience through the working groups that we have, through the likes of Farm Herefordshire, Rural Hub, etc. It's about transferring and sharing all that sort of information collectively. And we need to be able to prioritise our resources in the right places. So we have an internal version of the Alert tool that we use to help sort of prioritise sort of farm inspections and where we're going into the catchment, the areas that perhaps are considered to be highest risks in terms of runoff and nutrients. And likewise, for farmers and landowners, it's really important that to recognise risks on the land, and to prioritise resources there as well. And this is it's also a great opportunity to bring in funding and resources into the areas where it's needed most. So recognition of that as well. Also for storing water as well. We've got some really opportunities for sustainable use of water in the catchments. So this mapping tool will help support with that. Very quickly as well, we need a workable approach. It's no good developing tools that are frankly no good. So we've got to be able to sort of work together with this and recognise the wider benefits of these tools as well, because there are some really good win-wins to be had from this if we can really identify those benefits going forwards. I will just mention enforcement. There's a place for enforcement. We want to be able to support and provide, support where we can, but clearly where we've got issues and some of the, bigger issues, there are times when we will need to sort of step in and enforce where necessary. So I'm just going to now hand over to Ty, who's going to talk through sort of technical aspects of the alert tool.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm again starting with some rather shocking images. So I'm going to talk about the public release of the alert tool and other work we're doing in the Wye. But first, some examples of why we need to take action within the Wye to prevent diffuse pollution and soil erosion. So here we have a drone shot of an image of a field in Herefordshire. This was taken in January 2023, where a cover crop was not in place early enough, over winter, that is. So as you can see, erosion rills all up the centre of the field, slightly out of shot here as well, some more, and they actually span across the whole field. All of this has resulted in runoff, so all of the soil's lost to the bottom of the field and then moving on to the neighbouring field. This is primarily due to a lack of soil protection over winter from a cover crop. We talked a little bit earlier, I think Phil mentioned about the rainfall event a few weeks back. So this is a sentinel-2 image taken just around the Lug, where east of Herefordshire, 17th of October, so a few weeks back now. And we had that big rainfall event a few days prior. Here we can clearly see the sediment-rich water. Oh, nearly clicked forwards. Sediment-rich water, especially in some of the fields which are bare. So you can see up here the pooling of the sediment. We understand that we can't prevent flooding, but we can reduce soil loss and diffuse pollution that results from it with our approaches and data-driven tools. So a key tool is the alert tool. So Andrew spoke a little bit about this earlier. This has recently been publicly released to everybody, so anyone can have access to this, farmer, individual, consultant, anyone can take this data and view it on their phone, on their computer, wherever they might use it. So alert is a collection of very detailed remotely sensed data, such as slope and landform. So this is derived from our EA collected LiDAR data. There's satellite imagery in there and many other derived data sets of analysis to show both combined risks and also opportunities within the landscape of pollution mitigation. So it can be accessed via the CSF pages of the Farming Advice website. If you go onto that site there, you'll be able to access it, or if you just Google farming alert, it will be the top result. Alert is used by Environment Agency officers, as Andrew mentioned earlier, and catchment sensitive farming advisors to identify issues, provide evidence, and help farmer discussions and on-farm targeting of measures. I can't cover everything that Alert has to offer in today's presentation, but the following slides will give you a good taste of what you can do within the tool and what can be seen. So here's a picture of the Alert tool and some layers turned on. So we have displaying the rivers. We also have overland flow pathways and areas where there is potential ponding, seen in the hatched areas. So with this data, you can quickly summarise and understand how water interacts with the landscape and identify those risks that they may pose. So the key data set here is the overland flow pathways. These describe where water is likely to travel across the land in a rainfall event. Each pathway has been attributed with an apparent risk. You can see they're colour-coded up, so risks might include soil type, geology, land cover, rainfall, to name a few. This can inform us where risk might be present in the landscape. It can also inform where mitigation measures might be useful to implement. So for example, if you know where the overland flow pathways are across your field or across your farm, you might want to consider where's the best place to put a sediment trap to prevent some of the sediment reaching watercourses. Alert also contains open access satellite imagery. So I was pleased to hear earlier in the talks about satellite imagery being used to guide some of the investigations on farms. So we have access to all of the open access satellite imagery, in this case Sentinel-2. It can be manipulated in a way in which we can visually enhance features. So you can see here that the flooding and the effects of flooding can be clearly seen in this. So here the floodwater has been coloured in a deep blue. Of course it's not deep blue. And the deposited sediment from peak flood can be seen in this yellow colour here near the watercourse. So access to this data can inform agriculture that takes place in these areas. Another great data set in the tool, the vegetation object model. So this is again created from our LiDAR, and it depicts vegetation over 2.5 meters in height across the landscape. So this can be a great tool. For example, you can look at hedgerows within a field and locate where a hedgerow may be missing, or there may be a gap in the hedgerow, and this in turn could be a location where diffuse pollution or overland flow pathway may flow through, so you may consider replanting that hedgerow. Here's a nice zoomed in area of a couple of fields. We can use the overland flow pathways and slope data within the tool to quickly assess the landscape. Using this, you can then identify areas to prevent soil erosion. So we combine this with current imagery from Sentinel-2 to assess what the ground conditions are like. In this example, the land flows northwest towards the river down here, and you can see that the overland flow pathways summarise in this corridor here with a steep slope and move on forwards. You see at the bottom of the field here, crop failure. This sort of suggests that there's been long-standing issues here. Standing water may have caused this, or compaction, or just general runoff. And up here you can see ponding, again, runoff locations. So this imagery, able to give us the best information about what we can do to prevent soil loss. Here's another example which may be of use. Sentinel-2 imagery, we have archival access in here, so it's not just the current imagery, but we can go back in time and look at what's happened in the past. So this group of fields, we've got a water enhanced version from January 24, and you can see here, and then we've got a version in June 2024 there. So you can see at points A, B, C and D, we've got standing water. You can also see in June, these are areas where crop failure has happened. So we're able to pick out these areas. Is it because of the standing water? Is this naturally a place where water ponds? Is this a place where compaction may have happened? Again, this can be used to help inform some of the farming practices and change the ways to prevent this happening. So this is a very quick overview of some of the tools and data within Alert. You can go onto the website and there's lots of help and guidance and training and overviews of all of the data within there, including soil type, geology, etc. All of this is open to everybody, so you don't need an account, you don't need to sign up to anything, you can access it when you like. I'm going to have a quick talk about some of the other aspects of work we're doing within the Wye, within the Environment Agency's remote sensing team. So we're using satellite imagery to target our ground resource. So we've analysed satellite imagery to provide evidence of the impact of diffuse pollution in the lug catchment of the River Wye. So here we have the confluence point. This is the lug running into the Wye. Focusing on the confluence, we've looked at a time series of Sentinel-2 imagery and analysed to identify pollution events. Linking this to rainfall, we can see that following a rainfall event, the river lug is seen to be carrying more sediment. I think I've used up all of the pointer. In the top right-hand corner, you can see the difference in colour. This analysis can support our ground teams through targeting of our available resources to go to locations that need it the most. So a deeper dive into some of the analysis shows a a sharp rise in the proxy estimation of turbidity at the point in which the river lug enters the River Wye. We can then repeat this method over time and looking into the future with our ground teams and targeting to see if the impacts of changes made on ground are having a direct impact in some of the evidence we can see within the satellite imagery. I'm now going to pass on to Ben, who's going to talk a bit about the work that the Wye Usk Foundation have done with some of the publicly available alert data and how they've worked on it and proved for their specific application. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Ben, and I work for the Wye Usk Foundation as a agricultural supply chain lead, so farm advisor for the Wye Usk Foundation, alongside Bridie, my colleague. I'm also a farmer, so I could echo the words of John and Phil from this afternoon about our own practices, but that would be too similar. So the work that we do within the supply chain, the Wye Usk Foundation is a Rivers Trust charity that I'm sure many of you are aware of. We've got a whole host of different projects which are working towards the common goal of trying to improve the water quality in the rivers Wye and Usk. The work that Bridie and I do focuses on how we can implement mitigation measures within the supply chain. So we work with farmers, growers, producers, packers and retailers to try and see what improvements can be made at any stage of that supply chain. We have often focused on the raw materials element of a supply chain, so where the food is being produced, but we try to actually focus on that whole series of events to see where there are improvements to be made. The mitigation we try and do is to try and prevent activities like soil erosion rather than to try and capture them. So we try and go for that method. The work that we've done previously has necessarily focused on nutrients entering the water, so water quality, and now we're actually looking to try and focus more on soil. So we're bringing soil into the project. The project that we mainly talk about is the Courtauld Collective Action Project, which was mentioned earlier, and that is a collective voluntary initiative for many different supply chain actors to be involved to try and improve the impact of food production on the environment. That brings us to the sort of project that we're here to talk about today, follow on from the Environment Agency guys. We've been lucky enough to get some funding from the Environment Agency to try and combat soil erosion from a slightly different approach to what we've done before. The Sustaining Soils project is focused in the Garran and Gamba catchment and is looking to try and develop the alert tool into something that can be used within the supply chain to get change to how the crops are grown, and most importantly in terms of field choice. So instead of how, we're looking at where and making those choices more accurately with more data. Some of these pictures, like we say, the one at the top there is a sort of relatively standard picture of soil erosion, and the one at the bottom is a fairly stark example, which hopefully we don't get to see too much of. The project we're looking at is to try and build a tool that can be used by farmers, by people writing contracts for landlords and tenants, by suppliers, by supermarkets, whoever it might be, that wants to try and assess the risk of a certain field where high-risk crops are going to be grown. We want it to be usable so that it isn't a preventative measure, but it's actually a tool that can provide ideas and opportunities for mitigation to allow crops to be grown in the right place under the right conditions. So this top left image is the alert tool, which is essentially the data that's open source that we've seen already. And we want to try and overlay and include more and more data to try and come up with a scoring system to identify where the high-risk areas are, and then hopefully off the back of that, identify where the mitigations can take place. We've done some ground truthing, and we're really in the early stages of this project with engaging with growers and then producers to find out where we can best embed the tool in their practice. The hydrological map at the top there can show water flowing essentially from east to west down towards a brook. And you could look at that and say, well, that's a steeply sloping field, there's a high risk point in that bottom corner, we shouldn't grow a high risk crop on there. But if we zoom out a little bit, we could really assess, in looking at the Scalgo map in the bottom right there, that a lot of that water is actually coming from the field above. So in terms of looking at mitigation, it would be more a case of, is there a hedgerow in place? Are the grass margins in place? And what are the soil qualities like and infiltration rates in and around those flow lines? And for this particular field, we know that the field above, there's a hedge, a grass margin on either side, and in the case of infiltration values, it's got a very high score, or very good score, I should say. So therefore, the actual risk to that field is quite low. So you might actually say that the mitigation's already in place, and therefore it's an okay field to grow high-risk crops in. Now, we haven't got to that stage where we can put those scores and those exact values on because we're in the development stage, but that's hopefully where we'll get to. The bottom left map here is what we will hopefully have something looking like that different members of the team who are far more technically minded than myself can put together that we can then go out and test. But we want to have something that can be used with the farmer, the person, the grower, because the farmer is not necessarily always the landowner, to make sure that when those field choices are being made, they're being made with well-informed information. The development of these tools, and especially the one that we've been working with the Environment Agency, are very metric driven. There's a lot of numbers, there's a lot of tools, there's a lot of maps and stuff that essentially go over my head as a farmer. And realistically, the people that make the decisions on the ground as to where things are grown and how they're grown are the farmers. We've essentially, in this sense, called them soil heroes. There are many of them in the room, and many of them have spoken today. But it's with these people that we want to try and work with this tool to make sure that it's developed in the right manner so that it can be used effectively rather than obstructively to the process. All of the work that we've done within the supply chain is to try and reduce the impact of food production on the environment whilst maintaining a high quality of food and a high quantity of food. So it's creating that balance without being impactful. So where we go from here, the project that we're working on at the moment is a short snapshot of work. We want to try and make sure that the impact we have is long lasting. So we mentioned the word contracts there. Some farmers have contracts to produce certain things for many years. And hopefully we can get our work involved in that so we can have a positive impact for years to come, and the work will then stand up by itself rather than being funded by isolated pockets. And that's where we've got the phrase of embedding good practice into the supply chain. One of the things that we've found to be most successful and have the most opportunity in the work that we've done is to incentivise or to support the development of incentive-based schemes. So where a purchaser of anything within that supply chain stipulates that a certain thing can be grown in a certain way, hopefully there'll be an incentive attached to that. And in the case of the potatoes that Ben was mentioning earlier, where you can grow them in a certain way with a one-pass development system, or if we go gold standard and no-till system, then that could be marketed to the consumer, as Emma showed as well earlier, and that can be based back all the way to the grower as an incentive there. And finally, another sort of specific example with the conversation earlier on maize and digesters. One area that we want to try and work on a bit more, and to follow on from the high-risk crops, we include maize in that category, we know of mitigating ideas that aren't necessarily being taken up whole scale. So things like undersowing maize, we want to try and push further and get greater uptake of those options. I've tried to rattle through. I think I've sort of brought back some time. But that's everything from us, my sort of favourite catchphrase at the end. And that's everything. Thank you very much.
My name's Chris Greenaway. For just over 3 years now, I've been managing Garnstone Farms in North Herefordshire. We are an in-hand farming estate, about 3,500 acres in hand, of which we have woodland, crops and grassland. We are a mixed farming business, so we have beef, combinable crops. We do grow maize and whole crop for an anaerobic digester that we're involved in. And then we've also got property and woodland, amongst other things. But I'm here to talk about how we look after our primary asset, our soil, and how this affects the why. When I get to the start, there we are. Right, our primary goal at Garnstone Farms is to be sustainable. So when I took on my remit with the owner was to maintain a sustainable business. Now that has many guises. It's both financial, but for what we're talking about today, it's soils and how we keep them sustainable to grow crops and maintain the lifeblood of the countryside. In doing this, we look after our soil health. So by that I mean we score our soils, we look for earthworms, we look for compaction, and we make sure that we feed the biology that's in the soil for it to successfully grow our crops. Part of this remit is nutrient retention. It's of no interest to us for heavy rainfall over winter to leach nutrients into the watercourses and away from the farm. We want to retain the nutrients because they have a value and because they grow crops for us to make us a return at the end of the day. We are a commercial business. It's important that we make a margin. In maintaining those nutrients, we need to maintain our soil structure. So in the bottom corner there, you'll see a penetrometer, which gives me an idea of any compaction we've got in the soil. Soil structure is important because it allows water to run through the soil and find its way naturally to the rivers. If it didn't do this, we would end up with waterlogged soil and anaerobic conditions, which just kills our biology and leaves us with nothing from which to grow crops from. In maintaining structure, we've got several methods that I'll go on to later, but this encompasses drainage as well. So all of our land, or most of it, is drained in some way, shape or form, and it's important we maintain that drainage to keep water moving through. So this is all summed up by saying we need living soil. So living soil has many interactions with roots, sugars, microbiology, and different bits and pieces. So the methods in which we do this, we use cover crops, has been mentioned many times before. I'm pleased to say that most of what I'm going to talk about actually backs up and is cohesive with what people have said before me. But we don't like to have any brown soil at any time of the year, which is an echo of sentiments that have been said already. So we grow a couple of spring crops on the estate. So they would be land that's let for tender stem broccoli, and we also grow maize. We will always have a mixed species cover crop to maintain the soil between over the winter period. There are several reasons for this. We want to catch nutrients and stop them from ending up in the water. We want to recycle those nutrients for any subsequent crops. And we want to stop the majority of the runoff and any erosion. For obvious reasons, I go back to soil being our primary asset, we want to keep that on the farm. Next method is companion crops, and there's a picture there of us putting some Italian ryegrass and some maize. And on the previous slide, you'll see after maize harvest there, you'll see the Italian ryegrass at the bottom there, which is supporting machinery. And I can tell you now that harvest was this year and was in extreme wet conditions, and we're not rutting or making a mess of the field. So companion crops have a plethora of importance to us, but they hold the soil structure together after harvest. They're an insurance policy, so if we harvest our maize crops in September, October, and the conditions are far too wet for us to get a following crop in, then we can just leave the grass there and it will act as a cover crop over winter, so we don't have bare brown soil. Some of the companion crops, for instance, buckwheat that we grow with our oilseed rape, work in a sort of symbiotic nature, so they will collect phosphate, which can then be used by the rape crops. We use legumes in a similar way, which John mentioned before. Low disturbance subsoiling is another method. So most primary cultivators mix up the soil from depth and mix everything up like a big washing machine. In Herefordshire, we have medium heavy soils, or particularly in North Herefordshire. To maintain percolation of water, we need to lift the soil a bit because we get natural compaction of the soil from heavy rainfall. Phil mentioned before about the quantity, I can't remember the figures, but they're pretty astronomical. The figures of rainfall that we've had in our ground this year, that in itself will compact our soils. So we on our farm, and I've tried it for a number of different ways, we cannot just drill into the soil and expect it to grow because the condition of the soil below is so tight that it won't grow a profitable crop. Catch crops, so occasionally if we grow whole crop oats, we might harvest those in July and that land will not see another crop get planted into it until maybe late September. In that situation we'd plant a catch crop. In fact, I can think of one that we're growing now because we harvested oats in July and that won't be seeing anything until broccoli in March, so we've planted something in between. For us that's far too long to leave a brown field. And that's doing all the same things that a cover crop would have done, but its primary intention is to catch nutrients. Site selection is an interesting one that I put on. So we are fortunate that we have mixed enterprises at Garnstone, and this includes a livestock enterprise. We took back in hand a farm last year that the tenant retired from, and there are a few fields which were on the side of a rather steep slope. It was apparent that it wasn't really suitable for cropping because of the nature of when the rain falls on it, the soil just runs off. So we planted it with grass. So that's solved that problem, and we've had the heavy rainfall recently, and all the water coming off those fields is, you can see through it, there's no sediment in it at all. They're just not appropriate for cultivations, so we don't grow crops on them. And then last of all, establishment methods. So we employ a number of establishment methods on the farm. We are not per se with direct drilling, strip tillage, minimum tillage, ploughing and combination drill, whatever it might be, but we do all of those things in the correct situation. So we strip till in front of our maize, which means that we only cultivate the area whereby the row of maize will grow. The areas in between are left. We minimum till our grass seed, so we only cultivate to about 4 inches, maybe 5. But the plough is not the devil. So what we had to learn the hard way in 2023 is that when we have such extreme weather as what we did have, the soil can become waterlogged, and you can kind of smell it when you walk into the field. There's an anaerobic smell, and actually the weather, the environment, had actually killed the soil by its own accord. In that situation, the only thing we could do to actually repair the soil, start a new cycle of microbiology and get things growing was to turn it over with a plough, bring up some dry soil, get a crop into it and get things moving again. Otherwise, we just would have had dead soil for the winter. But to sort of justify all of this chat, we need to measure what we're doing. So through the Wye Usk Foundation, I've now done 2 or 3 years worth of data collection on measuring the phosphate in land drains and local brooks and things to try and see where phosphate's getting in the water and how. So we've been measuring land drains and compared grassland to cultivated land. We've looked at different fields that have had different aspects done to them. Some have had farmyard manure, some haven't, different bits and pieces. Try and see if what we're doing is working. And if it isn't, what we've got to change. So the acceptable limit in the Wye is 0.05 parts per million of phosphate. In 22 and 23, I measured a couple of land drains, opposite ends of the estate, quite a distance apart. We averaged 0.04 and 0.06. One of those is obviously acceptable. One of those is nearly there, but no cigar. So we had to look at what we're doing. Now, interestingly, the 0.06 actually was pretty good, but every time we had significant periods of rain, there was a spike, and that's what made the average come up. So most of the time it was okay. And in the end, what we put it down to is we had a field heap of muck, and it was a long way for the brook. It was completely within regulations, but we think that was contributing, finding its way to the land drains. So we have to be really careful about where we put our field heaps. Well, on the next slide you'll see, but since then we have employed some muck stalls and different bits and pieces, but there are different options. This year just gone, we compared a cultivated field to a grassland field, and interestingly the grassland field, so permanent pasture, hasn't been cultivated in decades, no one can even remember when it was last done, was producing more phosphate in the land drain than the cultivated field because of the methodologies and the things that we employ to try and keep the water clean that goes through the soil. I did one cultivated field, was measuring water from the land drain, and I benchmark it against the brook, which comes from further upstream, and the water that gets attributed to that brook come from farms, village runoff, all sorts of things, and the brook was 0.21. So the water coming off a farm was cleaner than that was coming through the farm from the brook upstream. Other methods of measuring that our soil's in good condition are simply crop yields and quality. So if we're growing millet wheat and we're trying to get 13% protein, and we're still getting 10 tonnes a hectare, and we're even lower than RB209 recommendation for fertiliser. So if we're achieving those goals with low fertiliser input, then our soil can't be that bad. It can't possibly be. And the same goes for cattle growth rates. So we employ mixed herbal lays. All of our grassland has legumes with it, with the exception of some permanent pastures on steep slopes. And the growth rates of the cattle are good. So it must be doing something right. Further efforts on the estate. So we've covered sprayer filling area using a grant. That's just one example. We also got 3 muck stores around the estate. where we store muck over winter to try and stop any nutrients leaching out of those muck heaps and finding their way to the water. We variably apply our nutrients. Now, this was brought up earlier using satellite imagery, but we do ours rather differently. We've got a live sensor, so it measures reflectance of a crop, so how green a crop is, and then alters the amount of nutrient it applies. Therefore, the hungry parts receive more, the less hungry parts receive left, or we inverse that when we want to push areas on for protein. We calculate the crop need for all nutrients using RB209 or soil analysis. We've concreted yards, so the main yard at the main farm used to be a dust bowl in summer and sludge during the winter. It wasn't very pleasant, and of course that mud would always find its way into the water and into the drains and add to the problem. So concreting the yard has stopped that. This coming year we've got a grant to stone load of tracks. We've got a load of soil tracks, and every time it rains you've got brown water running out to the road. What can we do about that? We're going to put in some cross drains and stone the tracks and try and stop that. Same for the next few things. Rainwater harvesting is an interesting one because taking water out of our rivers isn't benefiting anything. So we've installed large rainwater harvesting tanks, and they pretty much now, because we've installed another one not too long ago, they now pretty much hold enough water over winter and accumulation through the spring to cover all of our spraying needs for the year. So we don't draw out any water for our plant protection products. Responsible organic manure use. So what I mean by that is we are involved in AD plant, as I said earlier, which is an interesting topic. We do use digestate, but we only put it where the rules allow. And I've tested land drain water to make sure that we're not adding to the problem. We only use a very small proportion of digestate from our plant. Most of it is sold and goes elsewhere in the country. And the same with poultry manure as well. We've also employed a lot of buffer strips, so every waterway and ditch on the estate has a minimum of 7 metre, because you've got 1 metre of cross compliance plus 6 metre of grass margin. So there's 7 metres of grass around every waterway on the estate, and that keeps the fertiliser away, plant protections away, catches any soil runoff hopefully, and generally just stops anything nasty getting in the water. And then last of all, cattle water troughs and fencing. We, along with Farming Rules for Water and Journal Advice, we've used grants to fence off all of our waterways. None of our cattle get their water from brooks, streams or anything else. They all have a water trough in every field. So there's no reason for our animals to defecate in the rivers. And I think that's me. I'm a bit quick because I'm trying to catch up on time.